we'll get a file again off the server. So there's in this ft_t2 folder, there is a file called dumpster. So we'll just get that. Okay, so it's some simple geo. It's a little garbage dumpster here. What we want to talk about is creating PSD networks to start texturing some of the parts of this. So let me get my time slider and rain slider in there, and go to the hypershade. Now, the first thing you want to do is, as usual, basically, go ahead here and create a material for the surface. So I'm going to create a blend material. Right now, we're going to concentrate on the front surface. I'll just assign that. And just like before, we basically want to check the topology of the surface and kind of see how a 2D texture is going to lay out on the surface. So if you go to the color, right now I'm just going to go to 2D and get a checker pattern. And let's smooth shade and hardware texture this. And you can basically already see the issue. It's sort of similar to what was going on with the faucet in that by default, if you take a look at this, you'll see that depending on how the isoforms are laid out here, when we have longer isoforms, we're getting a stretching of the texture, and as we have isoforms that are close to each other, we're getting compression here. So if you lay this grid on here, you'll see that the grid is uneven, basically. So it's stretch, compress, which is not really what we want. Now, as I mentioned before, you can always, with Nerve Services, open up the attribute editor here, flip out the texture mapping tab, and turn on this fixed texture warping. Then you'll notice when I render this out, this is now uniform. So you'll see that in this particular instance, the fixed texture warping sort of unifies the UV space and resolves the stretching and compressing issues.
You can only see that when you render it.
Well, yes and no. Obviously, you can't see it here.
Yeah.
And that's because we're in default quality rendering. If you go to high quality hardware rendering, it will show it. But yes, in your standard hardware renderer, it doesn't show this. If you go to the higher quality, it will. So, what if we wanted it just to be right here and not fix it with the texture warping? Well, just like before, we could basically rebuild the surface. So, I could go ahead here and auto-load new objects. Jump to the perspective view for a second. Grab the isoform here, and I'll just grab that one there as well. And I'm going to say surfaces, edit curve, and just duplicate curve off that surface. I'll take the original surface right now and just put it in the layer and hide it. Then I'm going to take those two curves, and I'm going to say edit nerves, edit curves, and say rebuild curve. So if we rebuild these curves with some sort of uniform type topology, and let me go to the side view here, or front view actually. And I'm going to just go ahead and take all the vertices here. And scale them down just so to make sure that those are all perfectly flat. Then I'll take these two and scale them to the same depth. And pull that back a tiny bit. And then I can take that and simply do a lock. Then we'll assign the material. Now you'll notice when you see weird stuff like that happening, what that meant is that when we did the lock close is on, which is obviously not what I want, so you want to make sure close is off when you're locking. And so now you'll see that this is working properly. So the topology is uniform there. Without having to go in and fix the texture warping, and you'll see it showing up properly in the default quality rendering. So we'll go with that as the front surface here. So now that I see that's working, I can delete this checker pattern here for the moment. And we can create a shading network. So let me select the Okay, so what I'm going to do here is the first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that whatever material you want for this piece is assigned. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go into the hypershade here, and you're going to say edit in the hypershade, and you're going to say create PSD network. Mm-hmm. It's the only way it knows. It looks at the object and then loads up the material that's attached to that object here. So then we can determine what attributes we want to, in essence, paint it.
Multiple objects that they all have the same material on it?
You need to do it one at a time. So it's going to create an image here. So I'm going to rename this. You'll see by default the name is named after the file on the surface, but I'm just going to call it dumpster paint here. We have a size here, which will, I'm not concerned about the size, so we can always resize it in Photoshop, so I'm just going to go with 1K right now, so that's fine. If you have a polygonal object and you want to see the UVs, you can say include UV snapshot. Right now I don't have to worry about that for the moment. And then you're going to pick whatever attributes that you'd like to paint into. So color, in this case bump, diffuse, and we'll go with specularity or spec color. So I'll go with color, bump, diffuse, and specular. And then I'll simply say create. So what it does is it actually creates a Photoshop file. That Photoshop has layer groups here. And you'll see that it automatically opens that file up in Photoshop. And it automatically connects everything and creates a shading network. So, let's talk about the size. So the first thing I want to do is I'd like my Photoshop file to be in proportion to this object. So it'd be nice to know the rough width to the height here. So, if we go ahead here and I say create measure tool, we have this thing called the arc length tool, source render of surfaces, and basically you'll see that if I move this around, I can see that this is the 0, 0, 0 corner, and that's the the edge over there. So this is telling me that this is 9.9 units wide by 4.8 units tall. Okay, that's what those numbers are. So we'll do 991 by 483, let's say, for argument's sake. So in Photoshop, what we can do is turn off constraint proportions, and under the width, do 991. Height, we'll do 483, and I'll just say, okay. So now this is in the right proportions. And then if I want it bigger, I can just go back here, say image size, turn on constraint proportions, and then type in any number. So like if I want this to be 2K wide by like about 1K tall, then I could do that as well. And I know now that we're in the right proportions. Then of course I can simply save this for the moment. Okay. So, with that in mind, what we have to do is get some textures here. So, let's jump back to the internet. Let's go to our CG texture site. And first thing I'm going to do is get some, some metal. There's a whole section here called metal. And we want basically like some base metal here, some painted metal there, something along those lines. So find something that we think is okay, depending on what color we want our dumpster to be. So maybe something like that. I'm just going to create a new folder here. I'll call it dumpster texture. We'll go to the folder here and copy that over. So that's going to be a base metal. Let's get some graffiti as well. And I'm going to get a couple different images so we can talk about some different issues. That's funny. Okay, so let's I'm going to save that one. And I'm kind of picking some images that aren't perfect so we can talk about some, how to pick some of these things. I'm looking at the size here. Maybe this one too. That's a little bigger. And this isn't a great picture, but once again, just to talk about some stuff. Okay, so we'll get some of that stuff right now. So let's go back to Photoshop here. And the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at what's going on. So as I mentioned, how this works is a Photoshop document's been created, and we have layer groups. So color, diffuse, bump, or sorry, that's actually specular color, diffuse, bump, and color here. I'm going to reorganize these just for a second. You can do that by dragging. So I'm going to put, normally color would be the first thing we would deal with, so I'm going to put that on top. Then bump. Then maybe diffuse and specular color. The order here doesn't matter, it's just going to be a little bit simpler. So let's go into color here.
Quick question. Did you make a 10.4 by 10.4 Photoshop?
Yeah, but then I resized it based on, yeah, I resized it based on the measurement here so that it's in proportion to our surface. I looked at these numbers and then resized it to 991 by 482 or 483. I rounded that up to the the closest digit there. And then I scaled. Then once I had a Photoshop file that was in the proper proportions, then I scaled it to 2K. So yeah, so you look at this. What you can see here. We started here, then I resized it, and made it bigger. And we just reordered all the layers. Okay, any other questions? So I want to click on this layer group here, so make sure that's highlighted, and let's open up something. So, actually the best way to do this is with Bridge, probably. So with Bridge, you can go to whatever your folder is in this case. Go ahead in here, and then you'll obviously see thumbnails of these things. So let's open that one and then take a look at it. So in this particular instance, the first thing we want to do here is obviously crop this, and looks like it has a little bit of warping, but we could resolve that as well. So let's grab this, and I'm just going to crop it like right here. Now you'll notice that right now my cropping is snapping. You can turn snapping off here. So we don't want that snap to the edge. And I don't really want the shadow there either, so I'm just going to crop a little bit in here, and we'll get a little bit of that rust over there, do something like that. Okay, so that looks reasonable for the moment. Now, obviously, you have to get these plants out of here, so I have to do some Photoshop work and paint out the plants. So once again, S or J. So if I do J there, I can simply come ahead here and paint that out. Now this is where you can see that, J is kind of like, since it's blending in the original color, we're getting some of the greens on the plant, we're trying to paint that out. So, it doesn't always work the best. So, this is where S might be better, at least to start off with, so that I can come in here and that's the stamp tool, so the healing brush. So I can come in here and, paint some of this out like this. And then if I want to blend that back a little better, then I can do that. So. So I can basically kind of make sure that all the branches are gone, and then go back to J, which is my healing brush, and then basically soften out that transition here, where you can see, like, obviously the marks from the clone stamp, where the color kind of changes or whatever, and do like a nicer natural transition in between those two colors. Okay, so you can do something like that. So we'll say that that's okay. Obviously, I can clean that up a little bit more, but I think this is fine. Obviously, this is very, it's not an even surface anyway, so that could have happened like that. So let's save this. Just save that over that. Now I'm going to copy and paste this. Control A selects the whole thing. Control C, copy it, and then we're in the color layer here. We're gonna paste that. Control V. Now. This is bigger, obviously. The resolution here is higher than what this is here, so you'll see this is too big. So Control T is the hotkey for the transform tool. And if you hold down the Shift and left-hand drag here, then this will allow me to resize this texture here. I'm just going to click on that for 1 second. The one thing you might notice, though, is the color shifted quite a bit. So let's see what's going on. Okay, this is actually interesting to shoot. Okay. So when you create a file in Photoshop, when you say File, New here, or whatever, you have some sort of, well, right now we're creating a RGB color, right? So it's red, green, and blue. Now, if you look at the Advanced tab, there's a color space here that we're working in. By default, your monitor color space is going to be sRGB, which is a smaller color space than, say, Adobe RGB, which is another popular one. So sRGB is going to be your monitor color space. Adobe RGB or ProPhoto are going to be like larger color spaces. So you'll notice that if you look at this JPEG and I say image mode, or sorry, if I say edit, convert to profile, you can see that the profile here in this, the color space for this file is actually Adobe RGB. Whereas if I go here and I say edit, convert to profile, you'll see the profile space here is sRGB. So with this one, if I say edit, convert to profile here, and I say from Adobe to sRGB, which is our working RGB space, and say OK. And then I copy this and paste this here. You'll see that the color is the same now.
What's the difference between color profiles, like, functionally, I guess?
Well, here, let's go to the internet here. More information, basically. I mean, in a nutshell. Depends on what you're going for here, but let's go. Let's look at ProPhoto. So this is a good. It's kind of small, but you get an idea here. So if you take a look at this, represents visible color basically. This smaller rectangle here, right here, is sRGB. You'll see that this next rectangle out here is Adobe RGB. And you'll see this larger rectangle out here is ProPhoto RGB. So basically what it means is that, say for example, ProPhoto is a very large color space, probably larger than you would ever need because it gets complicated here in that you kind of have to figure out where your image is ending. So, for example, if you're looking at this chart and we have like this big triangle here that represents ProPhoto, right? And you'll see that inside of that is the Adobe RGB space, which is some smaller triangle. Say that's Adobe. And then, inside of that, there's some smaller one, and that's our sRGB. So what's the issue here? Well, generally, with photography, you want to start off with the largest color space so that you have the most flexibility in terms of image editing. But the issue here is that every source, like I said, it depends on where you're going. So with photography, you might end up, your goal might be to make a print, right? So if your goal is to make a print, i.e. a physical hard copy of the thing, then, like I said, you're going to start off with ProPhoto RGB, but that print, when you get to the printer, that print has a limited color space as well. And in this case, you can see that there's this weird kind of like circular pattern here. This is the available color that you could get out of, some specific paper here that they have listed. But the point being is that the printer is actually only going to represent color maybe like here, for example. So that being the case, the printer has a limited gamut as well, or a limited color range. So, even though we have more image in or more information in the image, once we get to the print, it's sort of irrelevant because all of that, the printer can't handle that. It can't do anything with that information. And the same thing is true with the monitor here. So it depends on the quality of the monitor, but and this is a big point here, which is when you buy a $100 monitor from Dell, it's only going to give you sRGB at best, right? But when you buy a $3,000 monitor from EZO or HP Dreamcolor or one of the high-end monitors, they actually have a larger color space, and most of those monitors can actually display 100% of Adobe RGB. So generally, Adobe RGB here is considered the standard for print work. So, like I said, you're going to basically have more visible color. So, once again, the point being is that in this case, ProPhoto is still bigger than both of those. So, you would have more information than you could ever display on your monitor. But a high-end monitor, as opposed to a cheaper monitor, is going to give you a lot more color, basically. So that's where this becomes an issue. Now, in this particular instance, it's only an issue because I was taking an Adobe RGB image, just pasting it directly into an sRGB image, and so we were losing all the color outside of that range. So that's why I changed colors. But then what I did is I basically converted the Adobe RGB to sRGB, which translates everything to the nearest color within the smaller color space. And then when I pasted it over, it's the same basically, or it looks the same to us.
Yeah, it looked exactly the same, so I I didn't know.
The green shifted. That's why I noticed it. Okay. Okay. And so, like I said, that's why if you go to like this is a segue, but it's important. It's good information to know. Like. To talk about monitors for a second. So there's a company here called EZO, or however you pronounce that, and they make a series of monitors called ColorEdge, basically. So this is considered their high-end monitor line. And you'll notice a couple things about these monitors. First of all, if you look at this monitor, you'll see there's this weird little red square there, and there's that black thing in front of it. This monitor is auto-calibrating, so the calibrator actually is built into the monitor. It actually flips up and will calibrate itself every day. So this is obviously this is the ColorMonkey calibrator that is a third-party external calibrator. But for high-end print work and photography work, color calibration becomes extremely important so that, in essence, what you're seeing on your monitor is what you're actually getting. And that's one of the big problems you have here. Like a student does something in Lab 1 and brings it to Lab 5, and it's totally different looking because all the monitors are different, or they do it at home, and they bring it here, and it's totally different looking. So, it definitely can get to be a problem, basically. So,
So when you're looking at like movies in general, are they in like a VR TV or?
Films generally are all the work is all the original stuff is done in in like an Adobe RGB color space. But then it gets a little more complicated with films because they actually have their own color lookup tables for the entire look of the film.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go to the So yeah, let's see. So if you look at this 27-inch monitor, for example, this is one that has, like I said, built-in calibration. And let's see, this is the CG 275. So if we go to shopping here, you'll see that's a $3,000 monitor, $2,500 $3,000 monitor, right? So for a 27-inch monitor, but you get a Dell and get a 27-inch monitor for $300, right? So like I said, what's the difference? Like, why are you spending like 10 times the money or whatever? Well, the difference is all of this stuff. Basically, this supports. This particular one does 97% of Adobe RGB, so it has a much wider color space. It has auto calibration. It also has 10-bit lookup, and basically, normally your monitors are going to be 8-bit per channel, but with DisplayPort, you can actually do 10 bits per channel. So you're actually putting more color information, so you're going to get smoother transitions here. It also has proper gamma, which most monitors don't have. So it has basically very, very accurate gamma. So you get, this would be your ideal gamma curve, and like on a cheap monitor, it's going to be all over the place, basically. So, once again, this stuff becomes really important when you're doing like high-end print work and photography and things of that nature. The other thing has to do with this stuff here, basically brightness and color temperature stability. So depending on what's going on with your environment. And some of these monitors actually will take into account ambient lighting and actually change the color temperature of the whole monitor depending on your ambient lighting, like all that kind of stuff. So, and like you said, this has built-in calibration and all that stuff. So, for digital stuff, this is pretty much like the golden standard for photography. If you go into any high-end photo lab, they'll be using these monitors generally. For us, the HP Dream Color is probably the best one. The HP Dream Color, once again, is a very expensive monitor, about $2,500. This was designed in conjunction with Hewlett Packard and DreamWorks, and all their artists work on these monitors. Same idea. Sort of the same idea, basically. This does 100% of Adobe RGB space, I believe. They don't have as much information about this, but this monitor actually does 100% of Adobe RGB, and it's like incredible. Like the reds on this monitor, I've like never seen on any display ever. It's like crazy. But once again, it goes back to if I create something on that monitor, 99% of the people are going to be looking at their $100 monitor, so it doesn't, it doesn't matter to some extent, right? So, it all depends. You have to understand where your target is, where you're going in the end. So, but just so you know, as a segue there. So yeah, so back to this. What we're doing here is. What I want to do here right now is I want to proportionally scale this. So ideally I want to non-proportionally scale this. So I'm just holding down the shift key while I'm dragging this out. And even if it overlaps a little, this picture happens to be very close to the proportions of our actual dumpster here. So we're kind of lucky in that regard. So pretty much fill that up. Okay? So now I have that into color. So let's delete that other layer. There was a gray layer there, but we don't really need that. So the next thing we need is bump. So I'm going to do Control-A, Control-C, select the bump layer, paste that in, and hide the color. Throw away the gray layer in the bump. Now bump, we're really only concerned about value. We're not concerned about color. So for this layer here, I'm going to say Image. Well, I'm going to say edit, or let's see, image. We could do an adjustment layer. So I can say image, adjustments, and then I can basically do saturation and take that down. Or you can simply say black and white here. So if you just say black and white, you'll see that it takes only that layer here, and it makes it black and white. When you switch something to black and white, it gives you it looks at the color values, red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow, and it, gives those some sort of tonality, as you can see, when it goes to the black and white image. So that's what these sliders are for. So this is basically taking all the reds and, shifting them more towards white or more towards black. By default, it's at 40%. So this is basically saying where are the yellows, where are the greens, where are the cyans, where are the blues, where are the magentas. Now for us, we have to think about what's going on in terms of the bump map. So anything that's lighter is going to push forward, and anything that's darker is going to push backwards. So, maybe I want all those areas to push backwards, all those areas that have rust or kind of more red to push a little back, so I could, slide that back there. Something like that. We'll say that that's okay for the moment. Now for diffuse, same thing. Let's paste that in there. So now we have to see what are our diffuse values for the whole surface. And once again, if we remember, the diffuse attribute controls how quickly something shades from the core to the shadow. So it's going to kind of control contrast in that area. So we'll just leave it alone for the moment. And then we'll paste this into spec color as well. And now we have to determine what's going on with specularity. So I don't want anything to be very specular. So for this particular layer, I'm going to say highlight it. Image, adjustments, curves. And basically I can take this down and kind of flatten it out. So we don't have a lot of contrast. It's fairly like dark specular right now. Specularity is going to determine reflectivity, but we'll just say something like that for the moment. So then I'm going to make all this visible for right now, and I'm simply going to save this. Go back into Maya, and in Maya what you want to do is you're going to go under Edit, and you're going to say Update PSD Networks, and you'll see that it'll update that whole network there. Now, when you look at our surface, you'll see that there's one issue, which is that our surface, the UVs are rotated. So the rest here, you go back to a Photoshop here, you'll see the rest is on top, right? And right now it's on the right-hand side. So what I can do is select the surface, edit NURBS, reverse surface direction, hit apply, and there you go. So now we're good. Now the bump is going to be a little heavy here, so let's put the bump up to like 0.2, render it out, and see where we're at. So that's what it's looking like right now. Okay. Now maybe I want a little more saturation out of the color, or something like that, or maybe a little less specularity. Now, I'm going to pull back the spectral up here. So then what we can do is go back into Photoshop and make adjustments here. So I'm going to say image adjustments, use saturation. Saturate that a little bit more. Get a little more color out of that. And then let's go back to Bridge. And let's open up Banksy image here. Okay, so this image is pretty small. It's actually quite small. But that's okay for the moment. Now, when you get an image like this, first thing you want to do is you can see that this is like, and I chose this one because it's kind of jacked up. So the first thing you do is see it's like very, very like, it has like a yellow tone over the whole thing, so the color is quite a bit off. It also needs to be cropped and some other stuff. So if we were to use this image, the first thing I want to do is get the color in line. So I'm going to say image adjustments curves. And basically, I can grab this eyedropper here and determine what is white in this image. So I can say that area right there is white, and you'll see that what it does is it actually shifts the red, green, and blue color curves here until we get a real white. So now you'll notice that this is basically color correct or neutral for the moment. So I can say okay. Then if I want to darken it down a little bit so it doesn't blow out quite as much, you can do something like that. And normally what you do is, let's just say okay for a moment, and go back to the curves here. And you'll see that that looks pretty good. You'll see this histogram is going up to the top here. So when we went in here and said, hey, that is white right there, right over there. Like I said, what it did is it actually shifted this curve here, shifted that curve there, and it shifted that curve there to create white, So you can dial these in individually if you want. But right now that should be okay. And if you go here, it shows everything. Now, the other thing you can do is if you click on here, by default, we're saying, hey, when I pick on this, I want it to be 100% white. But sometimes that's going to like blow out the image a little bit. So what you could do is say image adjustment curve. Double click on the white here and say, basically, when I pick this, I want to be at, say, 95%. So maybe not quite 100. Then when I click on there, that's going to make that 95% white, basically. So you'll see that we maintain a little bit of the detail in here. It doesn't quite blow everything out quite so much. And so for right now. Now, if I go back into the curves here, you can see that we have a pretty good histogram where it's not cut off quite as much. So you'll see that it starts off here in the shadows, comes up, and then kind of starts dropping down towards the highlights. Okay? Everyone understand? Now, similarly, we would have to, if we're going to use this image, we'd have to basically crop this, obviously. So go ahead here and crop that. And get here. And you'll see that there's some issues here on the ground, basically. So one thing you can do is we could either like kind of undistort this, or we could basically straighten this image based on you know, the ground level here. So you see this is actually kind of hard to work. But let's go into the ruler tool here. If you go into the ruler tool, which is underneath the eyedropper, and I select this corner and basically drag out what I'm going to say is a straight line there across that. Then I can say image rotation, arbitrary, and it's going to look at that angle and straighten out my file based on that angle. So that basically rotated that based on what I just did with the ruler. And then once again, I can go ahead here and crop that. Now this is snapping again, so let's turn on. And now that's going to be good enough right now. So I'm going to copy that. And like I said, this is too low. I normally wouldn't use this because it's really low resolution, but I picked that one because it had some issues that I wanted to talk about here. So then you go ahead here and basically paste it into the color here. Now you can see it's quite a bit smaller. So Control-T, scale this up. Now we're losing resolution here, but that's fine for the moment. And then just kind of put this over here for the moment. Now, first things to note, normally if you have a file like this and you're trying to integrate it into something else, like, you know, as if this was spray painted on the surface, one of the things in Photoshop that you might do is use your blending layers here. So you'll see that if we go through the blending layers, we could get like a darken, or we could get like a hard light or something like that. And you can see that I can basically mix this back into the other file, depending on what I'm looking for. So let's go to like, let's just say, so that's normal, that's hard light, and you can also pull back opacity as well if you want to, but let's go with hard light for a second. So I just want to go with some blending mode, or actually let's go with one that's more obvious for a moment. So let's just say darken for the sake of argument. Now, if I save this, and I go over here into Maya, and I say edit, update PSD networks, you'll see that that blending mode actually works here in Maya. So it's actually recognizing that blending mode. Okay? Now, let's go back here, Photoshop. In Photoshop, if you click on the little camera here in the history, you basically take a snapshot of your current settings. So let's go ahead and do a hard light here. And once again, let's save that. Jump into Maya. Update the BSD network. And you'll see that works as well. Now, if I was going to use hard light, obviously I don't want all these edges here. So what I would normally do is go ahead here and basically, kind of erase some of this or whatever, so that I can blend that back into my actual dumpster there. In whatever way, shape, or form, and get rid of like the wall and all this other stuff. So you just kind of have just the paint there. So you can do something like that. Now, if I now say that, and go back over here, and reload this.
Can you also update PSA networks? Like when you do activate by saving the file?
No, yeah, you always have to do it. Yeah. So you'll see there's a problem, which is why I did this, which is that it's having a problem with the transparency. Here on the edge, we're getting all this weird artifacting. So the point being is that it's not recognizing that transparency properly, so that's not going to work. So basically, let me make this a little bit bigger here. What we have to do if we're going to do this is we basically have to merge the layer. So the disadvantage of doing this is that, excuse me, we're locking ourselves in here when we're merging the layers. But, it is what it is. So you could do it like this. If you want to like save everything, basically you could, you take a snapshot here, you can take a snapshot of your current sort of position here. Then I could take this layer and say merge down, so that merges those two layers. Then I could copy that, go back to the other thing, and then just paste it. And now I have, the merged layer plus the other two pieces underneath it in case I want to change that layer.
Does Maya pull in those other layers as well, or does it just get overwritten by the top layer?
Well, everything will be in the file, but this is on top of the other one, and that's normal. So you'll see if I save this, and we go back into Maya here, and I update the BSD networks. You'll see that it's normal now.
But Maya's bringing all that in as one layer, though, right? Or is it still recognizing that there are 3 layers in that folder?
In Maya, it's just reading the composite of the whole layer. So you'll see in the area here, we might want this a little bit brighter, right? Looks a little dull. So how would we do that? Well, we have to go back into Photoshop, and I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I'll say layer, and I'll say duplicate layer right there. And it's going to create this duplicate here. So basically, when you duplicate the layer, you're just pretty much just copying it, obviously, so we'll say OK. And then I'm going to drag that layer down to diffuse. Hide what's going on with color, hide what's going on with font. As we've already talked about, the diffuse is only values, so I say image, adjustments, black and white. So that'll turn that to black and white. Then I can say image, adjustments, curves, And we'll take the white value down a little bit, so it's not quite so bright. And the blacks are probably too dark here, so we'll take the blacks up a bit too. So something like that. And then say OK. Once again, that's a hard light. So to merge that down properly, I'm going to take a snapshot here. Merge that down. Select that. Copy it. Go back to the unmerge, and then paste that in on top. Now, when you save your files, all layers have to be visible. If you leave the layers invisible when you save the file, it's not going to read them properly in Maya. So now I could go up here and once again update the PSD network and render this out, and it's going to be brighter in that area because I raised the diffuse value quite a bit. Okay. So that's obviously too much, so then I have to go back into Photoshop and just throw that away. Get back to here. And look at the diffuse. Maybe I want the base diffuse to be actually even a bit brighter. So I'm going to raise up the base values. And then here, I will lower those values some more. Take a snapshot, merge it down, copy it, paste it in there, make everything visible, save it, go back here to Maya. And there you go. And you just kind of go back and forth like that. Okay, so you can see how I can go ahead and tweak each of these things. But basically what I have to do is just make that even darker there. I have to take account value into each of these layers. Save that for a second. I have to take a look at and think about, what is this item doing in each of these layers in terms of the bump, the diffuse, spec color. So I'll give you another example of that. Let's jump back out to the internet, and let's get some sort of, I want to put like a poster. So let's get like some random poster. Get our make art not war. It's a little small here. I want reasonably sized things. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what it is. Let's say that one's fine. So save our picture. Once again, we have to look at this in Photoshop. So let's go to Bridge here, double click on this. So if you take a look at this, you can see that it's not straight, first of all. So the first thing that we need to do is I would crop it from one corner. So let's find a corner here. and that we think's okay, and crop the whole thing here. And we'll go to something like that. And you can see exactly how not straight it is. So then what you have to do is you have to select it, and you can say edit, transform, and you can say distort here. So we're going to go to edit, transform, distort. Turn on snapping. Control H will hide everything if you don't want to see that. But basically we're grabbing the corner there, and I'm just going to pull it out. Grab the corner here, pull it out. Grab that whole edge there, pull it down maybe a tiny bit. Okay, so you'll see that, fix that. This is very saturated compared to everything else. So image, adjustments, hue saturation, maybe desaturate this a tiny bit so it kind of matches everything else. Then let's just save it for a second. I want to look at the curves here so we can see the histogram. So you can see that we have shadow all the way to highlight information, so that looks okay. So I'm going to select this, copy it, go ahead here, go to my color layer, and let's paste that in. It's very big, so basically scale it down, move it into location, and let's just kind of put it on the dumpster over here. Now, once we have this, like I said, we have to think about what's going on in this area in every layer. So, for example, what you're going to do is if you control click in this layer, it will select just that item. I can then hide color, go into my bump mapping, and say new layer, say OK, and then in this case, I'm just going to pick a value here, like a gray value. So we want this to kind of come forward, right? So I'm going to get a value that's lighter in terms of the bump than anything we see. And I can just brush that in there or flood it in there or whatever. Let's see, but let's get a big brush and paint it in there. And so yeah, so you can do something like that. Now, I don't want to lose all the texture that we had in the base thing, so I can take the opacity back a tiny bit. So that's that. Then once again, we can go into the diffuse layer. Similarly, say new layer. Say OK. And then figure out the value of the diffuse, like how bright or how dark do we want the poster. So I'm going to pick some median value. And once again, just put that in there. So that's going to be my diffuse value. And then similarly, go into spec color, new layer, OK. And we want no specular, like no reflectivity or anything, so it'll be very matte. So then basically just do something like that. So you'll see that we've taken into account value in specular, value in diffuse, value in bump, color. Save that. Go back to Miner. Update the PSD networks. And render it out. Okay? Any questions about that? One other thing to note that's going to make quite a bit of difference here is that the one thing you might notice is that, let's get here a little closer actually. I'm going to get pretty close so you see what's going on here. Okay, so one thing you might notice is that this is looking a little bit soft, and that's because all these PSD networks by default have filtering on them. So you want to make sure, and I'll show you the difference. You want to make sure you turn that off on all of these. Especially the color. Re-render this. And I think you can see the difference. It's like, especially in the smaller details. So that's where we were. That's where we are now. So you'll see like all the detail there gets like sort of blurred out. If you look at this at 1:1, you can see where we were before, where we are now, especially like the text and stuff. You can see all the sharper. All the detail here is sharper. This is obviously too bright right now, but okay. So once again, go ahead, go back here, and make whatever adjustment. So I think in this particular instance, for this Banksy layer, like the girl here is a bit too bright. So I could throw that layer away. Image adjustments, curves. And basically just take that down a bit. Save it. Go back to my app and reload that. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, so save results. So I'll stop here. Let you guys do a texture for the front of your dumpster, get that all nice, and try doing get a base texture. Try putting some other stuff on it, like other artwork, graffiti, posters, stickers, whatever, and once everyone's got that together, then we'll go from there and we'll talk about how to do the sides, which is a little bit different. Okay?
What's your last big piece said that we should get the grayscale and image?
Well, I mean, you have to. The grayscale image is not necessarily going to just translate properly to the bump. You have to think about value. That's why when I changed it to black and white, I was saying that you have to look and say, okay, because this particular image is green, for example, but the rest is kind of red. So that's why I was taking that red and maybe putting it in a different place. But that is correct. If you just take whatever the gray values are and assume that that's going to be pushed forward and backwards properly, it's not necessarily the case. You have to be smart about it. Yeah, so we're at 10:30. We can take a break for a second.
Right click on the surface. Awesome. So it has problems in duplicate curves on surface.